independent report that isn't influenced, and there's not a perception that it's been influenced by viewing the body camera footage. So that comes up in a couple of different ways. Maybe the officer views the footage and then writes the report, and by viewing the footage, their memory of the events is skewed. That's just human nature. So they're focusing on what they've seen in the footage and maybe leaving out details that the camera didn't catch, but as a human being at the scene, they did catch. There also, if there's misconduct caught on the video or something that the officer might not want to have seen in the video, there might be the perception that the officer has written that report in a way to explain away what's seen in the footage.
So this is one that I have had trouble getting my head around completely, and I was curious. Does an officer, definitely officers have an opportunity to interview witnesses and then take that and put them in the report. Do they have and they probably have an opportunity to look at other camera footage if it's an incident downtown or there's security footage and they're collecting this information. And part of me thinks officers should get all the information they can to write an accurate, clear report so that it can be used as prosecution and as it goes forward. And then I was curious about dash cams and audio in the squad cars. Can they? So, and about, and partly I think, and I'm not sure if you listed that, but I think that the dash cam policies was a good model for what we could look at is how can we just take what's in that policy and do it with our body cameras, because we've been doing it for a long time and we've probably ironed out some of the issues. And I'm assuming they can look at dash cam video before they write their report now. Did you know if they can or not?
I believe they can, yes.
Okay, so this is kind of a different twist. And I'm understanding part of the fear, what I was listening to among people who came and spoke, is that they'll get a chance to look at the footage and then they'll try to destroy it or manipulate it. There wasn't trust and confidence in the process. And maybe that's happened with dash cam footage or other security cameras, as far as I know, and there's probably suspicion about that already. But so that seemed to be like an issue. So there was a bit of a conflict, and I was thinking, well, if we could convince everyone and ourselves that there's going to be this body camera footage can't actually be touched or manipulated by the officers or their supervisors or by anyone, that would probably take away a lot of this concern about that they're going to be viewing it, I think, but maybe not. Because I do see value in them being able to get the information and figure out their case, and they'll be going, I can't remember who said what first in that situation, and oh, that's right, I was recording it. I'm going to find out so I can be accurate. So I just wanted to kind of share that with you up here and with you, that's a hard one. I think I understand, and it might actually be this makes a lot of sense to at least do for the first 3 years and see how it goes, but I see reasons why we might want them to do it too.
Yeah, and we've also included a provision to try to mitigate. I think what you're getting at is that the office, having that footage is a great tool to be able to figure out what happened after the event. So we've provided a provision that after the officer writes the report and then views the video, then we recommend the officers be able to attach an addendum that explains anything in the body camera footage that doesn't quite jive with what's in the report, because we know that memories are imperfect. So that's a way to both preserve the evidentiary value of an independent police report, but also be able to get all the information from the body camera footage into that report.
Have a nice compromise. Councilmember Palmisano?
Mr. Chair, I believe that it's a technology limitation that any sort of editing of this camera footage, is that your understanding, Ms. Singleton?
Right, and that's my understanding, is that whatever vendor is chosen, that it wouldn't be possible to alter or damage or delete the footage in any way.
So I just want that to be absolutely understood. Body camera footage cannot be edited by the individual in any way. And that's a good thing in terms of establishing trust between the public and officers.
Definitely. And I think my understanding is that the software, when that footage goes into the computer, you need special software to even get to the footage, so that you wouldn't be able to plug a flash drive into your home computer and, delete parts of the footage. In terms of retaining body camera data, the Commission has recommended that all body camera footage be retained for a period of 280 days. And that 280 days comes from the 270 days that a civilian has to file a complaint against an officer. So that if a civilian comes in on day 270, files a complaint, you still have a 10-day buffer in which the investigator can go grab that body camera footage and then have it preserved for the duration of the investigation. There are longer retention periods for other categories of cases that either follow the statute of limitations or, for example, for use of force, we recommend 3 years. For any footage that contains a death, whether officer or civilian, we recommend that that footage be retained in perpetuity. The next thing I want to cover is 2 restrictions that were contained within the standard operating procedure that the Commission recommends be removed. The first is the Commission recommends allowing and having body cameras for off-duty employment. I believe the police department has already indicated they plan to remove that restriction, but part of the argument for that is just that when an officer is in full uniform and acting in his or her law enforcement capacity, they can incur liability for the city. So it's important to have that body camera footage. The next restriction is on SWAT operations, and the Commission recommends that body cameras be used for SWAT operations. And this is for a couple of reasons. Number one, almost all of the community input that we got on this topic was in favor of having cameras in use for SWAT operations. The best practices literature also agrees that cameras should be in use for SWAT operations. We also know that a lot of the high-risk activities, a lot of the use of force incidents, just by the nature of SWAT operations, occur with the SWAT team. I know that the police department might have concerns that sensitive tactical information would be released to the public that the SWAT team uses, but the Minnesota Data Practices Act contains a carve-out for that type of information and classifies investigative techniques of law enforcement agencies as confidential or protected non-public information. So if there was SWAT team footage that captured some type of a sensitive tactical move by the SWAT team, then that particular piece of the footage could be redacted if there was a public data request. But we would still have the footage available if any issues arose concerning that incident.
Oh, Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So does the Minnesota Data Practices, you can redact it when the public asks for a request about the particular SWAT event. You can take out the part that is the techniques or something that they don't want to reveal to the public about how they do the operation. But so educate me. The tape is maintained, and then is that available in a lawsuit then, or what happens if there is a lawsuit about that? Under what circumstances can, and maybe this is a question for Mr. Osborne, I guess. I'm sorry. Peace be.
No, I am Mr. Chair, Council President Johnson. I believe the way, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I believe the way that would work is the data would be retained, classified according to the Data Practices Act as a deliberative process data, but a judge could always down the road order the production of that data depending on the circumstances. That's my understanding.
That follows my understanding as well.
Okay, thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yes,
Okay.
very much so. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So the last piece of the recommended policy that I want to cover today regards the policy revision piece that I already touched on earlier. And that's that after 3 years of having the body camera program, MPD go back and do a revision of that policy, relying upon the academic research that I already discussed, the research and study conducted by the Oversight Commission. And then we're also recommending that the department conduct annual audits of the body camera program and then rely on those annual audits to inform its policy revision. The final recommendation within this series is that the police department if it wishes to revise the policy prior to that 3-year mark, that it come to the Oversight Commission to let the commission know about those revisions, and that goes to the community trust. We heard some comments about people afraid that the police department might adopt a model policy and then go back a month later and revert to some different policy. So this is just a way to continue that transparency and allow the public to know if there are any revisions in the first 3 years after the policy is adopted. So with that, I will note that the full report is available online on the Police Conduct Oversight Commission's website. And we also have a very lengthy appendix that's over 800 pages and includes an annotated transcripts of all of the community listening sessions. We also have that in hard copy form here if anybody's interested in that, and I'm happy to take any questions.
And I also think that sometimes people appreciate the PowerPoint presentations being put up online. So would you be willing to allow us to do that and work with the clerk? I think that might be beneficial. Not that the lengthy report and all the appendices aren't interesting too. I think the kind of the redlined and I have a black and white version, but the underlined and highlighted policy is also very interesting and helpful to look at. So I really appreciate you doing that and all the work. I guess I have a question. If you've heard back from leadership in the police department and gotten any response from them, and also if you've gotten any feedback from the community, those that filled out surveys and were so engaged in it, and that about how this meshes with what they think the policy should be. Any reaction so far?
Yeah, I believe that Chair Brown of the Oversight Commission will be meeting with Deputy Chief Arredondo. I think they'll be talking about the body camera policy, and I think that there has been some back and forth so far on that. And then in terms of community feedback, the feedback that we've gotten, particularly at the meeting where we released this report, has been very positive, and that people feel like this policy, this recommended policy, does a good job of balancing all of the voices that we heard.
Well, very good. I did actually have an informal conversation with Deputy Chief Arredondo, and he seemed to indicate that it looked pretty close to what they, he was appreciative and thought a lot of things were right on, and I'm sure there's details to work out and discuss and think about. But that's interesting. I guess the third leg of that might be on the ground police officers or the police union or any feedback and response from that area to this yet that you've heard of?
Not that I've heard directly from a police officer. I know that Lieutenant Kroll has released some statements in the news media. And I should mention that as part of our research, we actually had an officer come into one of our policy committee meetings and spend 2 or 3 hours with us discussing, she was part of the pilot program, and discussing how it went for her, what her thoughts were. And that was enormously useful to have the on the ground feedback of how the cameras actually work when you're in the field.
Very good. Councilmember Palmisano?
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure who to direct this question to, but I have just kind of a policy or a procedural question rather as to where we go from here. My understanding is that this report was meant to go to our police department, and it's very informative and useful. This is the second time I've seen it because I was at that other showing of it. Is that this goes to inform the police department, and then does the police department then develop what that policy is, and the chief finalizes it, or do we have a role in it from a policy perspective as council members?
That's a good question. I think technically, if we were to look at the charter and consult with our attorneys, we'd be told that we don't have the authority to approve the policy even. We play an important role because we approve the police department budget and we approve the appointment of the chief. But I think we could ask to hear it. We could weigh in. We could theoretically approve it, but my understanding is the policy will be set by the police department and the chief and really the mayor. The way the charter is set up, the mayor oversees the police department and usually designates the chief. But I'm not the city attorney, and I, just on the council, but that's my understanding. I thought we could receive and file this. I also think we could expect to get a response from, in the future, learn the policy and get a committee report from the department, and I'm sure they'd be willing to do that, and I'm sure they would take comments and direction and requests from us about the policy too.
Thank you. It was just about how and where our feedback would be appropriately placed at this point. So thank you. We'll give that more thought.
If you have, and if I thought about that too before the meeting, and I thought, well, maybe I would have a staff, would there be a staff direction or some questions? And I thought, I didn't come up with any that we do at the committee necessarily, but I think that they'd be happy to come in and give a report on their response to this and how it's informed the policy that they want to put in place. So that's my understanding. Anybody have any other thoughts? Okay. All right, well then, yes.
We appreciate the work that was done, and this new technology is a challenge for all of us, and I think the Department of Administration's ruling the other day puts right now the onus on the legislature to get something done about this. And it's one thing when a couple of departments have pilots or using the technology. It's going to be everybody. So there's going to have to be some decisions made at the legislature, which is not always an easy thing to have happen. But we need direction, and not just us, but other departments across the city, across the state. So, this should be really hot on our legislative agenda as far as, we might want to think about what we want to ask for in our legislative program for the use and restrictions about the data, not just supporting or be more specific, I guess is what I want to say about what we think about how the legislature should act in providing guidance about what's public and what's non-public.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that maybe I share some of that appreciation for this report and the work. It seemed like you went over and above, and you did the research that went into this and coming up with these recommendations. And I actually think this could be a model that other cities could look to and could use, and this will really help in the bigger picture, even the statewide picture. So very impressive, and I appreciate the presentation today.
Thank you.
And I think I speak for all committee members and probably all the residents of Minneapolis, if I can be so bold, and appreciating the great work that you've done so far on this, and real effort to try to balance kind of a lot of diversity of needs and goals and aims of this whole new program that we're venturing into. So thank you very much. And I'll just move to receive and file this report. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, and seeing no further business before us, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.